people what started off as a small lie but then snowballed into, this is my life now. Story 1. When I first got married back in 2005, my wife asked me if I liked creamy peanut butter. I knew she did, so I told her, yeah, that's great. She buys creamy peanut butter. I buy creamy peanut butter. About 3 years ago, she was doing some experiment or something with our daughter and needed chunky peanut butter. I saw it in the pantry and exclaimed, oh, chunky peanut butter, I love this stuff. To which she responded, you do? I've been buying creamy peanut butter all these years because you told me that was your favorite. So long story short, we both prefer chunky peanut butter by a large margin, but had been buying creamy for 10 years because we both thought it was what the other preferred. Story 2. I was a new graduate student, freshly arrived in the US and very poor. I couldn't afford a laptop, so the only way I could communicate with my family was to go to the library and use a public computer to email them. Eventually, my girlfriend back home wanted to video call, and I wanted a little privacy for this, if you know what I mean, so I set about finding the most private computer available in the library. On a recon mission the day before the call, I found a single computer in a conference room, and the next morning, I got up at 7 a.m. to account for the time difference and walked into the conference room with my eyes totally focused on the computer. I had actually walked most of the way in before I realized there was a group of people around the conference table having a ridiculously early morning meeting. The guy at the head of the table, apparently thinking I'd showed up for the meeting and was heading towards him, handed me a paper that said agenda and said he was glad a graduate student had shown up, then launched into the most incomprehensible talk about electrodes and chemistry. Meanwhile, I knew my girlfriend was sitting halfway around the world, thinking we were going to have a video call, and I was not showing up, making me feel desperate. But everything I knew about US culture was based on movies, so I had no idea if I could just apologize and leave or what. I miserably sat down for the incomprehensible meeting, rehearsing all the excuses I would give my girlfriend when we talked later. I was barely paying attention. Eventually, questions were directed at me, and I confessed that I was a new grad student and didn't know much about the equipment they were discussing. Everyone excitedly told me all about it, and I still didn't fully understand what they meant, except that they were going on a research expedition to an exciting, remote, and dangerous place, and they were building a piece of equipment to bring with them. By the end of the meeting, I was part of the project. 6 months later, I was in an exciting, remote, and dangerous place, helping to operate this equipment. I appeared briefly in the background of a Discovery Channel documentary, the only black guy within hundreds of miles, so easy to spot. I happily transferred to this other lab and field for my fully paid and stipended PhD. I was considered a real go-getter, mainly because I arrived at an early morning meeting no one else wanted to attend. New major, new field, new life, because I was too awkward to admit I had just been in the room to video call my girlfriend. Edit. Broke up with the girlfriend, but we're still friends. I have a new girlfriend now and have never told her this story for obvious reasons. Also, my advisor doesn't know. He was the enthusiastic guy at the head of the table, and he loves his work so much that he never questioned why a business major would show up to hear all about it and get converted to love it as much as he does. He's still exactly that oblivious and enthusiastic. He'll probably tell my conversion story at my upcoming defense. Story 3. A new coworker of mine tried downplaying his birthday, and after I kept asking why he didn't like celebrating, he eventually told me in confidence that his best friend was killed on his birthday, and he hates thinking about it. Fast forward 8 years. This guy and I had become really good friends, best friends. We even lived together at one point. He was accepted into my friend group, and I always made sure to downplay his birthday. His is 4 days after another friend's. So we just did a group thing and never made a big deal about it. Finally, someone got brave enough to talk to him about it, and he laughed, having no recollection of telling me that, and said he was probably just messing with me. He always wondered why no one wished him a happy birthday. Story 4. I'm a visiting nurse and started seeing a patient 3 days a week for wound care. He was a paraplegic who didn't get out much or have many visitors. He offered me a cup of coffee one morning, but I didn't know him well yet, and was uneasy about drinking something from an unfamiliar kitchen. Plus, we're really not supposed to, but I could tell he just needed a little company. I told him I'd drink it black to keep it simple, never planning to have another cup. The next day, I came in and noticed a little sticky note on his counter that said, "Remember to make fresh pot of coffee for Rachel." It was so touching that I went in early every single appointment from that day forward to have a cup of black coffee. I hate black coffee, but I felt it was too late to tell him I liked creamer after all. I drank black coffee with him for 3.5 years, and he became a good friend until he passed away. Story 5. I became friends with one of the managers at Panera. One day, as I was giving a cashier my order, he told her to give me the same discount they give to firefighters, police officers, and paramedics, I think. He just chose this discount because it was an easy button to push on the register. Well, this cashier really thought I was a firefighter. I'm not. So for the next 2 years, this cashier gave me the discount. Even if she wasn't serving me, she would go out of her way to tell the cashier helping me, he's a firefighter, give him the discount. It snowballed into such an awkward situation that I didn't know how to get out of it. Luckily, that cashier eventually transferred to another store, and I now happily pay full price. Story 6. I've been making EDM since I was 13, and in my senior year of high school, I had the opportunity to play some of my music live with Ableton for my classmates at an event. But because I couldn't explain what I was doing in the space provided on the sign-up sheet, I just put down DJ, thinking nobody would be knowledgeable enough to know the difference. Apparently, everybody liked it so much that the prom committee asked me to DJ prom, and like an idiot, I said yes. I waited for my birthday and made sure that nobody got me any gifts, just money, which I spent on software and a Mixtrack Pro. I learned how to DJ in 3 months, did prom, and got paid $250. I'm making decent money off gigs now, and I do the prom every year. Story 7. I didn't want to go to dinner with the gang from work, including my boss, so I told them I was having dinner with my wife and her parents. I lied. I get home, and my wife wants to go out to dinner. So we head to the restaurant, and just as we're getting near the door, I see the work gang with my loudmouth boss all piling out of their cars. What are the odds of us picking the same restaurant? Busted. There was an older couple walking into the restaurant in front of us. I held the door for them and insisted they join us for dinner. They were quite perplexed but accepted my offer of a free dinner. It was the most uncomfortable dinner ever. They had no clue who we were, none of us had any shared interests, and they rushed through dinner, thanked us, and got away from what I'm sure they thought were a couple of weirdos. Story 8. People picked on my brother in high school after he got confronted by some wannabe gang members in the bathroom. Popular troublemakers, if you can believe it. It was relentless. His confidence and friendships were crushed because, people didn't want to be seen with the loser. One day, I was confronted by those same guys, basically talking bad about my brother, and in my infinite wisdom, I said I could box, so they better back off. Something to that effect. Looking back, I cringe, but you do what you have to. Needless to say, they didn't back off. Somehow I landed a punch on one of the kids that dislocated his jaw, like it was flapping around like a mouthpiece hanging from a football helmet. I became the kid who could box, but never wanted to fight, which I guess gave me credibility. I don't really know. Everyone and their friends came to me asking where they could learn these boxing skills, how I'd learned by 16, all that stuff. I wanted to just come out and say I had been lucky, but I didn't want anyone to mess with my brother again, so the lie stayed. Luckily, no one ever picked on my brother afterward, and I did eventually learn some boxing fundamentals because I felt like I was living a lie, which I was. As an adult, I haven't had to keep up the facade. Story 9. In 4th grade, I lied and said I was going to a track meet to impress some friends in class when the teacher asked if anyone was going. I went home and told my mom I needed to sign up for it. I was never good at athletics at this time in my life. I ended up going to the track meet. It was a 400m race I was entered in. I remember the moment the starting gun went off. I immediately went into a mode I had never remotely gone into before. I was actually ultra competitive for once in my life. I was neck and neck with another kid for the first place spot the entire race, and going into the final stretch, I felt like puking, and every fiber of my body was burning as he started to pull away. Something came over me, and I kicked it into overdrive, pushing past him for the win. My legs felt like noodles, and I collapsed, unable to get back up. That race qualified me for a regional meet. I did that one and won again in similar fashion, then went to the state meet and got my butt handed to me. That started me down a long path of long-distance running, eventually becoming one of the best in the nation in high school and earning a scholarship to run in college. The training at that level consumes your life, 100-mile weeks. So it became my life at that point. Story 10. I did online homeschooling for a few years, and there was a forum where you could socialize with other students enrolled in the school. During this time, I was big into making music on a DAW I had downloaded. I didn't know how to play any instruments, but I could still download different drum beats and guitar riffs from the developer's website. I shared a few songs with my fellow classmates and told everyone that I could play guitar and had a friend who tracked the drums. Eventually, people started asking me for guitar lessons or more songs. I couldn't keep up the lie, so I told them that my friend had moved to Africa for a mission trip and would not return for the foreseeable future. But everyone on that forum thought I could play guitar. I couldn't, and still can't play to save my life. Story 11. I was looking for a job and didn't want to be a fast food manager anymore, so I fluffed out my resume with computer skills I didn't have. I was contacted by a recruiter who asked me some questions to gauge my abilities, and I straight up Googled the answers as he was asking them. When I went to the interview, the boss had all these circuit boards sitting all over his desk. I recognized them as Raspberry Piss from Reddit, so I asked what he was using them for. The rest of the interview was just this guy bragging about all the projects he had going on. He might as well have been speaking Greek. I just feigned interest and said wow a lot. I got hired. Who knows how this happened, but I have literally Googled every problem I've been given. Day 543, they still think I know what I'm doing. I'm making 1.5 times what I was making as a manager. I have a GED, for goodness sake. Story 12. A guy I knew was giving this girl a hard time, and she kicked him. Okay, extreme reaction, but such is life. He doubled over in pain, but since he was kind of a jerk anyway, no one cared much. The next day, a Friday, his dad took him out of school for some reason. When he returned on Monday, he learned that the big rumor was that he had to get emergency surgery because of what happened. Rather than correcting anyone, he went along with it. This went on for years. People made fun of him, and he just joked about it. There were idiotic songs people sang about him. He laughed about it and never denied it once. In fact, he even participated in some of the joking at times. Finally, about 3 years later, he comes clean. She didn't even actually kick him in the sensitive area, just in the gut, and it really knocked the wind out of him. After all this time, the guy who got kicked was basically his identity. Story 13. My husband works as a data analyst and codes programs and apps for the business side of the company. Once they make an app, it needs an icon to go along with it when it launches. They usually use the company designer, but one day, one of his coworkers submitted an icon design for their new app, one my husband had worked on, and others followed. People kept submitting art, so they made it a contest, no prize, just glory. When he got home, he told me about it and then asked if I was interested in joining. That night, I did a quick design. He fell in love with it and asked me to finish it so he could submit it. So I did. Time passed, my drawing won, and they made it the app icon. Everything was great until the day his team was in a meeting with the company VP. The VP had heard about the icon competition and asked who had submitted the winning app icon. One of my husband's co-workers quickly called out his name before he could say anything. The VP was impressed and then said that he deserved a reward, a monetary reward for his work. Surprised and too embarrassed to correct the VP, my husband just stayed quiet. Not denying the information made everyone believe he was the artist. He doesn't have an artistic bone in his body. When he got home, he told me the story and gave me the money for my work. I thought it would end there, but it didn't. When their next app was ready for launch, someone asked him to make an icon for them because they loved his previous design. He could have put an end to the misinformation then, but he was too embarrassed, so he said yes. He got home and asked me to make the icon, even offering to pay me. I found the situation hilarious, so after laughing at him, I agreed, plus I was getting paid. This has been going on for about 3 years now. I have made around 5 icons for the company under my husband's name. He has been pretty dedicated to keeping up the lie all these years. He's even asked me about my thought process when I draw, so he can explain his method to his coworkers. He asked about my tablet and the program I use. He brainstorms about the drawings with his coworkers and tells me what they want. And when I'm too busy to draw, he tells his coworkers how he is too busy to draw. By now, it's our little secret and has turned into an inside joke. Right now, I'm supposed to draw a new icon, but I've been so busy that I haven't had time. So when I see him playing games or relaxing on the couch, I tease him by saying, "Shouldn't you be drawing right now?" Story 14. I'm from a small town and was super worried and anxious about how college would go. After move-in day, everyone on our floor had to go around saying our major and what we wanted to do career-wise. I was fourth to go. The first 3 people said doctor, lawyer, surgeon. I was convinced at that point that everyone in college was way smarter than me and had everything figured out. You know how it is. Anyway, I blanked, blurted out economics as my major, then said professor, because it was the best thing I thought you could do with that degree. Now I'm in my second year of a PhD program because I just never found a good reason to change from my original idea as a freshman. Story 15. I have one. A good friend of mine didn't have an umbrella on a very rainy day, and one of her coworkers offered her a lift home. One ride turned into 2, then 3, until he was shuttling her to and from work every day for months. This coworker is also a very good baker. He would make these lovely cakes and pastries and offer them to her, which she politely accepted every day. Then, one afternoon on her way home, he stopped and picked up his parents. He happily introduced her as his girlfriend. She was shocked by this title, to say the least. They proceeded to invite her to a family gathering over the long weekend to meet everyone. His parents were so nice that she accepted because she didn't have the heart to embarrass the guy. She went to the gathering, met other family members, and he kept introducing her as his girlfriend. She never worked up the nerve to correct or stop him. Long story short, they are now married. Story 16. I was a simple retail employee, basically doing it since I got out of high school. I made the old college try, but ended up not pursuing anything more than an AA. I worked with a lot of people I really liked and admired for one thing or another, and I just wanted to fit in with them. Compared to the stories they told, I always felt like I had done nothing with my life or time. One slow day, stories were being exchanged, and the conversation rolled back to me, so I blurted out that I was a photographer in my off time and went on a long story about my years in photography with film in my own darkrooms. I told countless lies about the difficulty of transitioning from film to digital, but said I still kept my old film cameras for certain types of shots. I messed up. Of course, everyone wanted to see my work. I weaseled my way around it and told them I would bring some in, but, of course, I had nothing to show. That night after work, I went to Best Buy and maxed out my credit cards to get a lot of camera equipment. I went on a tirade of learning everything I could, signing up for community college courses on every type of photography I could find. All this just to hide the mountain of shame I created. I started taking pictures every morning at dawn, and every evening I could get out of work before sunset. I even worked as an assistant to a wedding photographer for free for 3 months on top of all that to fill out a portfolio that hadn't existed up to this point. Everyone was so happy looking at my work that I couldn't bring myself to stop. I kept at it. I hiked trails I didn't think I could hike just to get that perfect, hard-to-find view of a sunrise the next day. I started doing weddings and parties by myself for free to capture the perfect picture out of thousands so I could show it off. I began traveling the world to validate the photography adventures I had told stories of. It's been a spiraling mountain of lies, but at the end of the day, I discovered my love of photography through them. And now it's my whole career. 365 days a year, and I have never been happier. Story 17. When I was in first grade, to try and connect with my friends who would only talk about Ocarina of Time, I made up a video game that I kept telling them was cooler than UT. It was called Guardios, and it was supposed to be about frogs dressed in Peter Pan outfits, loosely based on the first part of UT. I was the cool kid at recess because instead of playing Pretend Legend of Zelda, I made them play Guardios, which was just leapfrog. I kept telling them about it, and they came over to my house sometime later. I remember them asking me, "Where is Guardios?" I made up the lie that my brother took the N64 cartridge, and we couldn't play it. They were upset, and one kid cried and made his mom pick him up. Hit me up if you want to play Guardios, though. Story 18. When my mom was very young, the family was painting the house. She snuck off to somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, did stuff she wasn't supposed to do, and somehow ended up with gasoline in her eyes. Miraculously, no one smelled the gas. So when her parents took her swollen, tear-filled face to the doctor, he asked, what was she doing when this started? To which her parents more or less replied, she was painting the house with us and the 6 other children. The doctor concluded that my mother was allergic to house paint. So she spent the rest of her childhood and some of her teenage years always being kept away from paint. Her parents would even be careful when visiting places to make sure there wasn't going to be any wet paint. And they wouldn't paint the house unless she was going to be gone. Little things like that. My mom, lying by omission, just let it happen. She was almost 40 when she finally came clean, after her dad tried to put her up in a nice hotel over Christmas because the basement was being renovated and painted. He just kind of laughed and was surprised. Story 19. Many years ago, back in our teenage years, my younger sister landed her first job and was so proud that she could use her own money to buy Christmas presents for her siblings. While not extravagant, her gift to me was a box of chocolate-covered mints. Now, I'm not a big fan of mints, but I could see how much it meant to her, so I pretended like they were delicious, savoring every bite. I'm talking some Meryl Streep-level acting. I finished the box in minutes flat. This made such an impression on her that she has bought the same chocolate-covered mints for me every year since. It's been almost 30 years that I've kept up the charade. This is where it gets complicated. About 5 years ago, I met my wife. On our first Christmas together, she was looking for cute gift ideas and talked to my family. It came out how much I loved chocolate-covered mints. "I get them every year," my sister said, "and always finish the box before eating breakfast." My wife thought this was a perfect way to celebrate our first holiday together. A little taste of home. Now, for the past 5 years, the lie I only had to live through on Christmas has become the reality of each and every week. No one knows my secret. Anytime my wife wants to surprise me with a treat, it's always chocolate-covered mints. Story 20. 2 years ago, I went on a job interview. I was in luck because my mother's friend used to work there, and she was nice enough to give them a call before and recommend me for the job. The job description was perfect for my line of work and had great benefits. The interview went well, but at the end they asked me if I was religious. The lady interviewing me told me all the people who worked there were Christians and that they preferred if everyone on the team was too. I'm an atheist. I've debated religion most of my life, and here they were asking if I was a Christian. I didn't outright lie. I told them I grew up in a Christian family. My mom found faith when I was 12. They said no more, and the interview was over. 1 month later, they called me and I got the job. Every day at the start of work, we read a segment from the Bible and pray. I just sit there trying to look like I didn't get stoned the night before. Sometimes people take breaks to go away and pray together. They ask me to come to their church every now and then on Sundays. I always have to tell them I'm busy. The older married ladies at work are even trying to set me up with one of the single women here. It would never work out, but she's an amazing person and such a pretty girl. If I keep living this lie and marry her, I'd be signing myself up for a life of prayer groups, morning Bible readings, and church on Sundays. But at the end of the day, I get a nice paycheck, amazing benefits, and good hours. I guess I'll pretend to be a Christian for the rest of my life. At least I curse less now. Story 21. I was being trained for a job delivering water cooler jugs to homes. The guy who was training me was named Mitch, and he was quitting in a week. Now it's key I make the distinction. Mitch is a foot taller than me, has a giant beard, and is not half Asian. We found ourselves arriving at good old Ethel's house. She was an extremely sweet old lady who seemed mentally all there. Now every time without fail, she would have you walk straight into her house without knocking, switch the jug on her water cooler, and pour the remaining water into her kettle. After that, Ethel would give you a Pepsi, Mitch's favorite drink, and then you'd go on your way. Mitch introduced me and said, "Hey Ethel, from now on, Rugged Mountain Man 69 will be the one doing your deliveries." So, 2 weeks go by, and I head to Ethel's house for my first solo trip. On that first solo trip, I go about my stuff as normal, and she calls me Mitch. I politely correct her and say, "I'm Rugged Mountain Man 69. I continue changing the jugs, and she says, "Here's a Pepsi for you, Mitch." I don't bother correcting her the second time because I feel weird, and then accept the Pepsi, even though I don't like them at all. I leave her house feeling a little odd, but whatever. It's just being called the wrong name twice. 2 weeks pass, and I head back to Ethel's. I enter the house without knocking as usual, and she's in the kitchen waiting. I say, "Hey, Ethel," and she replies, "Hi, Mitch," which I don't bother correcting again. I finish up, and she gives me a Pepsi. And so began the next year of my life, where every 2 weeks I was Mitch for half an hour, said things I thought Mitch might say, and collected a Pepsi. I had gathered pretty much a 24-pack by the end, and funnily enough, I ran into Mitch in town one day and said, "I've got something for you from Ethel." I then proceeded to give him the Pepsis that had found their way into my garage every 2 weeks for the past year. Story 22. I'm probably extremely late to this thread, but a lot of these answers reminded me of mine. When I was in grad school, I would go to the same used bookstore in town. I was studying creative writing, so I went to the bookstore a lot, buying $2 or $3 copies of classic literature. I started talking to the owner each time she'd ring me up, and we became acquaintances. One day, I was in her shop waiting in line to check out. The man in front of me asked her a question about a book he was looking for. She replied that she'd find the book but wanted to ring Catherine up real quick. My name isn't Catherine. It's actually nowhere near Catherine, but she was referring to me. Awkwardly, I ignored her name mishap, paid in cash, and left quickly. In my head, I figured no harm, no foul. Well, I continued to go to the store to purchase books as the semesters turned into years, and she still called me Catherine every single time she saw me. I answered confidently and never once corrected her. It had gone too far. She asked about how my program was going, and I asked her how the shop was doing. Somehow I managed to pay in cash each time I was there, but eventually, the day came when I didn't have cash and only had a credit card. My card, of course, read my actual name. As she went to check the name on the card and saw it didn't say Catherine, she asked for an ID. I gave her my license and she confirmed my true identity. Neither of us spoke as she rang me up that day, and inside I was dying. I quickly got out of the shop and I haven't been back since. That was almost 5 years ago, and I still live in the same town. Every once in a while I walk by the shop and hang my head in shame. I miss that place, but I can't ever face her again. Story 23. In 2009, I was being interviewed for a job at Company A that would require me to use JavaScript and PHP. I knew exactly as much JS and PHP as it took to manage a simple WordPress site, but I showed them my page, which had a pretty great theme on it, and they believed I had done it myself. I didn't correct them. They hired me, and I BS'd my way through the job for a year. The contract ran out, and I got a job at Company B because I knew about JavaScript and digital advertising. I stayed there a little over a year, and then the managers from Company A decided I'd done such a good job that they hired me back for more money and with more responsibility. One of the devs from Company A taught me how to use their JS and AS libraries. Hey, it was 2011. And I spent 2 years building ads. That got me into Company C, working on the back end of digital ad systems. I spent a year and a half there learning more JS until I got hired at Company D. I am now a middle manager at Company D. My team is great at their jobs. I'm really good at talent assessment and constructive management techniques. I still only know a little JavaScript, but it's enough. Oh, and by the way, while I was working for companies A and B, I managed to convince a local university that I knew enough about JavaScript to teach a continuing education class on it. From there, I moved into teaching HTML5 and CSS classes, and I'd never done anything in HTML5 or any version of CSS above 2.0. Story 24. I used to deliver newspapers when I was 12. I had this one customer who was an older gentleman. When I started the route, he asked me what my name was. I told him, he asked me to spell it, and then he gave me a $5 tip. I saw him the next week, and he called me Amy. That's not my name. I tried to do the right thing and corrected him. Not a big deal. The next time I saw him, he called me Amy again. I didn't have the heart to correct him a second time. Not only did this happen with my name, but almost everything I told him he seemed to remember wrong in the next conversation. I just went along with it. Every time we spoke, I would talk to him as if I was Amy. So for 6 years, I delivered newspapers to a man who thought my name was Amy, and I had a completely different life than my own. All while he would tip me $5 almost every time I saw him, and $20 at Christmas. Story 25. So this isn't me, but my dad. A new restaurant opened in our town. It's a small town, so we were pretty excited, and it was Greek food, which we'd never had before. So family dinner out to check it out. As we were waiting to be seated, the manager saw us. He was seating some other people, but rushed over to us and sent the other waiter back to his table. He was really lovely, gave us a great table, and offered fantastic service. As we were leaving, he told my dad that he thought he was such a great musician and said, "Come back anytime." Now, my dad is an amateur musician, but he has played in the back row of a local concert band, so we figured the guy was just a big fan of the local amateur music scene. On the way home, we realized we hadn't been charged for the wine, but figured it was just a mistake. My parents went back, just the two of them, a little while later, and got the same treatment. The manager made a huge fuss over them and even gave them their desserts for free. They protested, but the manager said he was a huge fan, had all my dad's music, and was honored to have him there. And it finally dawned on them that this man thinks my dad is someone famous. We can never go back. Eventually, he'll figure out my dad's not whoever he thinks he is, and it'll be mortifying. But we don't even know who he thinks my dad is. My dad doesn't look like anyone I can think of, and no one famous lives around here. So we're just faced with keeping up this fiction if we run into the manager in public ever. Story 26. There's no serious tag here, but this might help me anyway. It pretty much started with, "Are you all right?" and my answering, "I'm fine." This happened around the time I was taken out of state by my mother, hidden away for a few months, and then finally found by my dad and stepmother after the courts decided she had no right to keep me in a safe house. Luckily, my father won full custody, and he deserved it. But this happened after my mother lied to the local schools, law enforcement, and many other people about how it was okay for her to take me out of class that day, despite my father and grandmother crying in the lobby. After the whole ordeal, I was definitely not fine, and I loathed my mother, hated her. I did everything I could to never speak to her. I ended up cutting off that entire half of my family because if I wanted to see my aunts, uncles, or grandparents on that side, she would know about it and manage to appear anyway. My stepmother ended up leaving extremely suddenly because she wasn't happy being locked into family life. She was younger than my dad, and though I had grown to like her, I hid my feelings. I didn't trust her. I didn't trust anyone at that point. A parent betrayed me horribly and tried to turn me against the other. As young as I was, I understood this. I trusted my dad, my sibling, and my grandparents, on my father's side. That was it. I had friends, sure, but I didn't trust them. I didn't tell them anything important about myself. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm all right were always the first words out of my mouth when asked about myself. The topic would change immediately. I was never doing well, I couldn't trust anyone, and I couldn't have faith in anybody. In middle school, I had a bunch of friends give a girl a teddy bear and say it was from me. It sort of forced me into this relationship that was really awkward. I didn't like her. I didn't really know her, but she was smitten. After 3 days of this farce, I broke it off with her and told her I didn't get it for her and didn't want to date her. She understood, but the people who set it up laughed about it the entire time, even making fun of me for going through with it. I didn't want to hurt her feelings since she and I were both victims, but I couldn't lie to myself. Probably one of the few times I actually acted on how I felt. Still, I didn't confront the guys like I wanted to. In high school, my computer was compromised by someone using Cain and Abel. I found the process running, and after realizing how long it had been active, I was furious. My roommate was the only person I thought could have done it, since he was the only one in the room at the time mentioned. I had grown close to him but still hadn't truly trusted him. With this, I stormed out, yelled at him, and vanished onto the campus that night. I didn't show my face for the next 24 hours. Luckily, there were no classes that day, but I needed to hold myself back. I was furious, betrayed, saddened, depressed, and then stoic. He said he didn't do it, and I basically responded with, "Yeah, sure." I lived the rest of the year out with him, but still felt like I didn't trust him. Looking back, I know he didn't do it, but the feeling's still there, and I'm working to get rid of it. Years later, my sister had a baby. I love my niece to death, but a guy, not the original father who was a scumbag, managed to abuse them both, and my sister betrayed everything I knew about her by taking his side against her own daughter. My trust vanished. I hated her with every fiber of my being and wouldn't talk to her. I didn't acknowledge her anymore and did my best to keep in contact with my niece, who was living with her great-grandmother on the father's side. My sister had turned on family, the only people in my life I felt like I could trust, and she managed to make me despise her almost as much as I despised our mother. I came very close to finding out where the guy was and taking matters into my own hands. Almost. By this point, I was convinced to join the military, where pretty much everyone assured me I'd be a good fit, have my future set for life, and live well. I got a job contract for a high-paying position, but after injuring myself in boot camp and spending twice as long there as literally anyone else, a total of 3 months, they discharged me. They said I'd be able to recuperate and re-enlist, but the recruiter insulted me in front of my father, saying that all of the girls made it and that I should have too. My dad defended me and I sat there. I didn't care. I never cared what others thought of me, because what do they know? I appreciated my dad's support, but I didn't need it. Still, it made me realize he was the only one I could truly trust. I moved. I moved out of town, nearly out of state. I left my family behind, lived by myself, and started a new job. The guy I started to room with initially secretly recorded advice I gave him about not messing with a couple that had gotten together. He was into the girl. He shared the recording with both of them, and I only learned about it when they told me. I moved out shortly after. I went for a promotion 3 times. I was passed over each time without a reason, and finally, they told me the reason was a single write-up in my file that happened 6 months prior. Everyone else who got promoted worked part-time or had very little experience, while I had been rated as one of the best in the company by that point. I had to speak with the person who wrote me up and prove them wrong in front of one of the highest-ranking people in the building. I finally got the promotion a week later, but not without a fight. I've always had trust issues, major trust issues. I told myself I could never trust anyone with anything. I lied to everyone I met, saying I was fine and that they could trust me. At least that part was true. I never shared secrets, and I never broke the trust they gave me, however undeserving it was. For decades, I put up this facade, this barrier between myself and everyone I knew, and never told anyone anything. People saw me as kind, patient, forgiving, level-headed. Thing is, I hate everyone. There are just people I hate a little less. I don't express frustration, I don't get angry, I don't raise my voice, I don't cry, I don't swear. A huge list of things people think they know about me. I'm the complete opposite. When no one's around, I curse like a sailor, throw things in anger, slam my fists in frustration, and scream. I scream a lot. I'm always screaming in my head at everyone I come into contact with. Sometimes I even feel like some people could die, and the world would be better for it, and wonder why I haven't done anything about it. I hate this farce that I am. I hate that people trust me when I'm the least deserving person possible. But in the past few months, 3 people trusted me with things that broke me. I cried. Tears ran down my face constantly for hours. I couldn't understand this trust anymore. I couldn't understand why I couldn't do it, why I hid behind fake feelings and fake attitudes. I'd been lying to people for so long about being fine that I started lying to myself. When 2 of my closest friends and a coworker came to me with what could be considered a ridiculous amount of trust, it acted as a battering ram, crumbling the barricade I had lived behind for so long. Quite literally, I had been living a lie for the past 20 years, building walls using bricks provided by key events in my life. I can't do it anymore. I feel like I'm dying inside now, a hollow shell of a person, and can't tell where my mask begins and where I end. I have no idea who I am anymore. I'm going through some processes to get help, but this is a recent realization. I'm setting up appointments with therapists. I'm going to see my 2 closest friends in hopes that I can be truly honest with them about me, about everything. I feel like they're going to see a different person entirely, and it terrifies me. I'm scared. And I don't even know if I want to see my family until I feel comfortable enough after therapy to tell them all of this. I'm hoping my friends can be a support group for me, to help me let this stuff out, but even writing this is making me shake. Story 27. I was a teenager, and I wanted to seal the deal with my girlfriend. By seal the deal, I mean have some awkward but enthusiastic romantic time and finally lose my virginity. Anyway, my parents were going on a beach trip, and I had a plan. Right before the trip, I would fake being sick, and my mom would have no choice but to leave me behind with an empty house. Cue the movie soundtrack. The problem was my mom had 4 kids and had dealt with fake sick days before. I knew a run-of-the-mill stomach ache wasn't going to cut it. Thankfully, I thought I was clever and decided to look up the symptoms of appendicitis, planning to progress through them in the weeks leading up to the vacation. However, what I didn't realize was that when you go to the emergency room with symptoms of appendicitis, they don't mess around. The doctor asked me some questions, which I answered correctly, having prepared using WebMD, felt my stomach and checked other areas as part of the exam, and concluded I had appendicitis. I was thrilled. My joy was short-lived, however, when I was told I would be meeting with the surgeon the next day. The surgeon did as surgeons do, suggesting cutting open my abdomen and having a look around. It was only when he said, "Well, if we're in there, we might as well just take it out," that I realized the gravity of my mistake. I tried to backtrack, but it was too late. They mistook my pleading for fear of surgery, causing the surgeon to double down on his plan. Story 28. I spent a year being unemployed and didn't do anything productive. Think drinking every day and spending my unemployment check at the bar. After a year, I got disgusted with myself and decided to look for a job. Eventually, I landed a job interview at a software company. During the interview, they asked about the gap on my resume. I tried to be vague, but eventually got cornered and concocted this story about how I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. They bought it. I got hired and worked there for 5 years. This became part of my story, and everyone at the small company, less than 200 people, knew about it. Over the years, people would ask me questions, and I had to weave an increasingly elaborate web of lies. After 5 years, I eventually left the company, hoping to let that lie die. I followed a former manager to another company. He eventually brought it up, and it began to spread at my new workplace. I'd had enough and came clean to him about the lie, It went surprisingly well. He praised me for coming clean, and I'm still happily employed at the same company. I feel like this could have been a good Seinfeld episode, and George would be the guy it happened to. Story 29. Once I was playing fetch with my dog. I'd throw the ball, she'd bring it back. She did this over and over again, never getting tired of it. Her favorite was an orange tennis ball, so one time I faked threw the ball. She looked for it, couldn't find it. She checked the far bushes under the car and even across the street to the neighbor's yard. She even sniffed Mrs. Tuttle's shoes looking for that ball. She came back to me asking where her favorite ball was. I said, "I don't know." She went back looking for it. Again, she came back and pawed at my right hand, asking where her most beloved ball was. Feeling bad about tricking her, I pulled out the orange ball I had fake thrown and told her, "I bought you a brand new ball." She sniffed it, cocked her head, and seemed to say, "This smells just like my old ball. Are you sure?" And I replied, "Yeah, I swear. Would I lie to you?" She gave me a big lick on the face as if to say, "No way. You'd never lie to me. You're the best for buying me a new ball." I threw the new ball, and that has become our routine. Story 30. I thought I had celiac disease because my mother and grandfather had it, and I was always feeling unwell, both figuratively and literally. So I went on a gluten-free diet for a couple of years to get better. It didn't work, and I'm now eating gluten again. The doctor reckons I have IBS instead. I'm too embarrassed to admit this to my in-laws and colleagues, as they have always gone out of their way to accommodate my diet and provide gluten-free food at get-togethers. So now I have to endure terrible gluten-free alternatives to foods I love or just miss out completely. I feel like they never really thought celiac disease was a real thing anyway, and that I was just being difficult, so there's no way I'm going to tell them I don't have it. Story 31. I'm in university, and during the summer, I stayed to take extra courses. All my friends left to return to their respective homes, leaving me alone. One day, I walked by a big party happening in a 4-story house. I decided, why not, and tried to walk in. I was stopped at the gate by 2 guys who asked who I knew there. I tried bluffing, but they caught on. After a moment's pause, they decided that if I chugged the last third of a bottle of vodka, I'd be allowed in. I did, and they gave me a hero's welcome. Once inside, I got talking to a girl and casually mentioned I had a girlfriend. Not long after, I jokingly called a random guy at the party my boyfriend. Instantly, she was all over it, asking, "You're polyamorous." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Yes." Got a problem with that? I spent the rest of the evening on a roof with an audience of 20 people, 20 drunk college kids apparently, telling them about my so-called adventures as a polyvisual male with 2 boyfriends and a girlfriend. I even gave advice to those whose partners had brought up wanting to try a polyamorous relationship. There were tears, hugs, amazed stares, and compliments on my bravery for doing something so unconventional. In reality, I'm straight and have a girlfriend. Whenever I see these people at school, I try to avoid them, but when I can't, I keep up the story. Story 32. When I was 14, I would always brag about how I never got sick. I wasn't interesting or good at anything, so that was the only thing I ever boasted about. Yeah, I know. One day, horror of all horrors, I woke up with a sore throat. My voice was raspy and hoarse. Of course, I couldn't admit that I got sick. This was the only thing I had going for me at that time. So I made a sign and taped it to my shirt, saying that I was taking a vow of silence. Now you've got to understand something. My parents were very religious. We went to church twice a week, so they loved this. They were bragging to all the other parents about how pious and holy their son was. It got serious too quickly. After a few days, my throat felt better. But I couldn't just suddenly start talking again, right? In my mind, I thought that if I was going to end a vow of silence, I had to have something important to say. So I started reading philosophy books. I stayed quiet for weeks, trying to figure out something profound to say, but kept doubting myself. I became that weird kid at school. Half the students made fun of me and thought it was dumb, and the other half thought it was kind of cool. The teachers played along because my parents were the kind of suburban parents who had nothing but free time to call everyone in the district if they thought something was unfair. It was the most attention I'd ever gotten. I started to enjoy it. After 8 months, I was getting really sick of it. I wanted to join conversations. I missed talking to my friends. But the longer you stay silent, the weirder it is to suddenly start speaking. So I decided that on the exact 1-year mark, I'd start speaking again. I worked overtime brainstorming what I was going to say. Finally, the day came. After a year of not speaking, I gave a note to my pastor, asking if I could break my silence in front of the congregation. He liked me and my parents, so he agreed. I got up in front of the whole congregation, looked out at all these people I knew, my parents, my friends, cleared my throat and said, "In 1998, the Undertaker threw mankind off hell in a cell, and he plummeted 16 feet through an announcer's table." Story 33. I now hate sweet potatoes. I vaguely remember liking sweet potatoes when I was about 10, especially baked. The problem started when my parents decided to eat healthier when I was a teenager, which for some reason involved putting sweet potatoes in rice. I was kind of annoyed because sweet potatoes aren't great when steamed, so I'd often just not eat them. This would have been fine, except my dad kept insisting they were healthy and tried to get me to eat them. I responded by saying I didn't like sweet potatoes. Since I'd eaten them before, they immediately called me out. But instead of admitting it and just saying I didn't want to eat them, I doubled down, insisting they remembered wrong and refused to eat sweet potatoes on any occasion. This only prompted my parents to coax me further, talking about how nutritious they were and trying different ways to cook them, while occasionally pointing out they knew I was just being stubborn. I denied this every time in that awkward way which tips off everyone that you're lying. But I won in the end when they gave up. Years later, I discovered I no longer liked sweet potatoes because I had apparently conditioned myself to feel disgust whenever they were brought up. Story 34. When I was a kid, maybe 11 or 12, I played in a golf tournament in a town 20 miles away. I wasn't very good, but I happened to hole out on a shot to get my first, and possibly only, eagle. After the tournament, I lied to my parents saying I had won the Eagle of the Day trophy, but we had left before they handed out awards. It's a ridiculous trope, but my parents didn't play golf, so they didn't know any better. Mom went into action, trying to get her son his hard-won trophy. She told me one day she had called the country club, and they started putting her in touch with various people to try to locate it. She wasn't having any luck. I turned pale but didn't say anything. She tried to track down a fictional trophy and failed. That settled it. Never had to discuss it again. Apparently, my mother kept searching for that trophy for the next 5 years. She'd bring it up once in a while to let me know she had gotten in touch with another person to try to find it. At about age 16, I finally came clean that I made the whole thing up. Story 35. This will probably get buried, but once I was in a silly mood while calling my school's parking pass office and started the call with, "Top of the morning to you," in my best Irish accent. I'm an Oklahoma-born Coloradan going to a school in Colorado. I felt it would sound odd or insensitive if I didn't keep it up, so I maintained the accent for the whole phone call. When I went in to get my parking pass, the same guy who answered the phone was at the booth, so I had to keep up the accent there. Since there were 4 or 5 other employees who heard me, and a few noted and complimented my accent, I've had to keep it up ever since, every time I go to that office. It helps that I have an Irish last name, am a pale girl with red hair and freckles, and am fairly good at accents. But I'm so nervous that one day someone I know will be there. I'll say something with my thick Irish accent, and they'll comment on it and blow my cover. I've kept it up for 4 years without issue so far, though. Story 36. I went to a small New England college. Only about 600 people lived on campus, so you got to know everybody. There was one girl there who spoke with an English accent, and I remember I remarked to a few friends that her accent sounded really fake. No one questioned her about it. It would be a weird thing to call someone out on, but her accent sounded really odd. One day, in the middle of sophomore year, she had a breakdown. That was when she admitted she was actually from New York, not England. Basically, in the first couple of days of freshman year, she got drunk and thought it would be funny to convince all these new people she was English. The next day, everyone started introducing her as the British girl, and she didn't know how to tell people she was just screwing around, so she went with it. Of course, she couldn't just put on a fake accent, though. She had to convince people she was actually from England. So basically, every detail she gave about her life was fake. It ended up being too much for her, and she had that breakdown. I never saw her again after that. I'm assuming she transferred or something. Story 37. In 2009, I was working a dead-end job, living paycheck to paycheck, and my then-girlfriend, now wife, and I were constantly struggling with financial stress. I could never find a job in the industry I wanted to work in. Fast forward to Easter 2009, I was sitting in the passenger seat of our small car while my girlfriend was driving. We got T-boned on the passenger side, which crumpled the entire side of the car and banged me up pretty bad. I managed to get out of the car, check on my girlfriend, who was okay, and started feeling a minor throbbing in my leg. I composed myself and ran over to check on the other driver. He was fine. It was a big truck, but he was angry, admitted he was at fault, and said he ran a red light. We sorted out the towing and exchanged information, and then I went home. That night, I got a frantic call from my brother. He always called asking for help, and I don't even remember what it was for, but I said, "Look, man, we were just in a bad car accident, and my leg is really feeling messed up. I can't help you." My brother was stunned and told me I needed to see a doctor. I was mostly exaggerating. My leg was just bruised, and I didn't want to go out and lend a hand. The next day, my leg was a bit stiff, and I felt lazy, so I called into work saying I was having trouble standing after the accident. They said no worries, work from home, and take it easy. So I did. I spent the day playing WoW and eating leftover Chinese food. When my girlfriend came home, I made a big scene about not being able to walk easily. She immediately took me to the doctor, and despite my protests, they sent me off for x-rays. While waiting, a nurse suggested I start looking into a lawyer since this was a motor vehicle accident. I don't know what I was thinking, but I went along with it and started faking this injury. The x-rays came back negative for any breaks, but there was a possibility of a dislocation that had righted itself, so I just said, "Yeah, I think there was a sharp pain during the impact." Anyway, I went on short-term disability. My girlfriend was forced to carry the weight, and I went on long-term disability and began physical therapy, which I faked my way through. Fast forward 12 months. I was done faking, having recovered from my injury, and was at a party with friends. They introduced me to a guy who had heard my story and struggles. He was so impressed by my perseverance that he offered me a salaried job. Nothing crazy but $45K a year, which was huge after working retail. Then came a settlement worth over $90K, which my girlfriend and I used to buy our first house. 4 years later, I'm extremely successful, making over $100K with commissions, promoted multiple times, and married. I literally owe it all to being lazy and faking a sick day after a car accident so I could PvP and WoW all day. My entire life is based on a single lie, but even now, sometimes I say my leg is acting up. Story 38. When I was a freshman in high school, there were a couple of kids I wanted to be friends with. They all played in a band, and I overheard them talking about needing a bass player. I lied and said I knew how to play the bass, so they invited me to practice. I didn't own a bass and I didn't know how to play, but I went to school early every morning to practice in the band room. I lied and said my gear was in the shop, so I needed to borrow theirs. Now, 17 years later, I play in a band and have toured all over the world. I help run a small record label, and I work for a music festival. Being in a band is my life, all because I wanted to be friends with this guy, John, who is still my best friend to this day. Story 39. I once lied on my CV about having a lot of computer experience when I went for an interview at a new company. I figured it wouldn't matter except to get my foot in the door, since I was applying for a management position. Well, the CEO tested me on my computer knowledge during the interview, but fortunately, he was even more clueless than I was about that kind of stuff. As it turned out, the management position they had open was for IT. Not a big department, just 2 guys who answered trouble calls for employees, a nerdy guy and a slovenly Irishman, and the goth guy who worked in the server room. They resented me being in charge at first, given my lack of computer knowledge, but I convinced them it was easier to let me deal with all the people issues so they could focus on technology. Now, we get along like a house on fire. The department has been going strong ever since, even through a change of CEOs. Story 40. I went to the University of Delaware at the same time as Joe Flacco. After college, I moved to the West Coast where most people know very little about Delaware. Usually they'd ask about Joe Biden or Joe Flacco. At first I'd say I didn't know Joe Flacco because it's a big school, and we never crossed paths. But then it turned into me saying we had a class together and he'd be out at the bars, to eventually saying I was his tutor, helped him pass his classes during the season, and that we remained close friends. I even changed a friend's number in my phone to Joe Flacco and would text him, "Hey, good luck this week, dude." He'd respond with something like, "Thanks, buddy. Blue hens for life." It's now a story I've told so many times, it feels real. My actual friends know the beats of the story and can corroborate the details, an important factor for any lie. Story 41. Back in middle school, I made a group of friends online, and we were talking about ourselves one day when I found out they were all female. Not wanting to be left out, I pretended I was female too, and started adopting what I thought were feminine mannerisms. As I met other people through them, my groups of online friends merged, and soon enough, to virtually everyone I knew online. I was a girl. Fast forward to a year ago when I started feeling more comfortable in my female online persona than in my real-life male gender. I read articles and books about transgender people, and it was then I realized that all of the feelings they described were things I actually felt. I've already started getting my close real-life friends to call me by my female name, and I'm considering transitioning once I have the financial resources to do so. Story 42. It's not part of my daily life, but one day in grade 10, about 7 years ago now, I made a vague reference to my brother in front of a classmate who had known me for 10 years. He took the bait and asked about it, and I said, "Yeah, my brother Derek. He's older than me, works out west, great guy, really into cars. You'd like him." This is pretty common where I'm from in Canada, so he believed it, and over the rest of the week I told a few more people. My family thought this was pretty funny because I only have one sibling, a younger sister. They pointed out that since my parents were married for 8 years before I was born, it would be perfectly conceivable for me to have a significantly older brother. So I folded that into my story. A couple of years passed, and I was still seeding this lie into my life just for fun. My closest friends also enjoyed the joke, but never spoiled it. By this point, I had even adopted a family photo of a cousin of mine who would have been about Derek's age. He played for my town's hockey team, which padded my story even further. At one point, we created a Facebook account for Derek, complete with likes, photos, interests, and even friends. I don't tell people about Derek to deceive them anymore, but I graduated and moved away without ever revealing the truth, which means there are potentially dozens of people who still believe I have a brother. At a wedding one time, my parents filled my cousin in on what I had been doing, and he thought it was hilarious and fully endorsed it. Story 43. When I was a teenager in the 80s, I sold small amounts of drugs to friends and friends of friends. This went on for a couple of years until I found out there was a detective investigating me for running a drug ring. Apparently, rumors had spread so out of control that I was seen as a massive drug dealer who was so secretive, no one knew who I really was. Whenever my friends had drugs at parties, they would tell stories about me being some crazy, dangerous guy, and for some reason, everyone believed them. This eventually caught the police's attention, and I started getting tailed, pulled over constantly, and had my car searched. After about 3 months of constant harassment, I packed up and moved out of state. I cut off contact with everyone I had ever known, except my immediate family. Many years later, after Facebook became a thing, one of my old friends contacted me freaking out. It turns out the cops had arrested several of my friends and tried to charge them with my murder. They thought my friends had killed me to prevent me from talking. I was working under the table for a while after I moved, so nothing showed up on any tax records. Everyone thought I was dead, and a couple of people almost went to jail for murdering me. Story 44. A few months back, I was at my sales job. I wasn't even that good at it, but it was money, so whatever. Anyway, this guy came into the office trying to sell some kind of tile or something. I can't remember exactly. Before he got into his sales pitch, he asked if there was an office administrator he could talk to. Nobody said anything, so I jumped up and announced that I was the office administrator and that we weren't interested in whatever he was selling. That's when I got the idea. A month or so before this happened, a big corporation purchased our company, so I went to our branch's corporate representative and told him that I hadn't gotten paid yet since my promotion to office administrator and that the paperwork must have been lost in the merger. He was a little concerned that I hadn't been paid, so he said that if I could get all the department heads to fill out his form, everything would be sorted. After that, it was easy. Most of the department heads don't read half the stuff they sign. So I just went around, chatted them up for a bit, and of course they signed without looking. I brought the completed form back to the corporate rep, and now I've got the title and pay of office administrator, and no one is the wiser. Well, no one except for my husband Jim, who sits at the desk next to me.